So I'm going to be talking to you about better monitoring for new and old networks that will be born from two specific features across our network portfolio. I'm Chris O'Brien. I'm a product manager here, group product manager for our networking portfolio, as well as the product manager specifically for Network Performance Monitor. So I have a history in network engineering, so hopefully I'm ready for your nerdy questions. Please interrupt me with your nerdy questions because I'm much better at having a conversation with you than I am at presenting anything. So definitely speak up. You can interrupt me and let's have a conversation about whatever that thing is that you're interested in. The first thing I'm going to show you today is some brand new visibility into Cisco Aci Environments as part of our NPM Network Performance Monitor product. The second thing I'm going to be showing you, if we have time, is multi-device baselines, which is a smarter way to deal with the large number of configurations you have across many sort of traditional CLI managed devices. You guys ready for a demo?
Always.
Great. Okay, so let's jump out of email into a demo, see if we're still have an active session. So over the past couple of years, it's been a really interesting evolution of how people are talking about SDN. So we see two large SDN commercial solutions in the space, Cisco Aci and VMware's NSX. We hear amongst our customer base and the people that come up to us in conference booths more about ACI and more needs around ACI monitoring, so that's what we focused on first. Now that conversation has changed in a couple of different ways. I went to a lot of Cisco Lives over the years, which tends to be the preeminent place we hear about Cisco ACI requests. Makes sense, right? You see a session, you come to our booth and you ask about it. In years past, it has been a lot of like, hey, I just saw a session about ACI. We're totally thinking about doing it someday. What are you guys doing for monitoring ACI? And really, we weren't doing anything yet. So there was a great conversation for me, but we're not really delivering anything. We have now delivered monitoring for Cisco ACI, and the conversations have been changing from we are thinking about ACI to we have ACI and we need to monitor it. So now, as part of NPM, we can do that. And in talking to those customers, the number one, we learned several things. I'll tell you a number of the different lessons we learned along the way. But the number one problem that we found is customers just being aware of an issue, a problem, a degradation of performance in their ACI environment. They had actually pretty great monitoring from the APIC. Interestingly about SDN, for the first time, we have a single device that knows a lot about the network in the network infrastructure, right? Because that's the nature of SDN. Cisco's APIC GUI actually does a decent job at helping people understand and monitor and troubleshoot ACI environment, but they're not aware of when a problem is there because they're not logged into that all the time. So we wanted to solve that problem in NPM. I'm going to show you that. So in talking to customers, we learned to monitor an ACI environment, there's really two layers. The first layer is the physical layer. This is your ports, CPU, RAM, power supplies, hard drives, all of these very traditional things that we've been doing and lots of folks have been doing for a long time. Your packets still run across those, so those are still important. So that's your first layer. The second layer is the overlay. Okay, and so the overlay is the logical network that sits atop your physical network. To monitor this, we developed new monitoring, new polling that we get from the Cisco APIC. So I'm going to go ahead and find an APIC here. We poll the APIC via API. Cisco has done an excellent job of making a bunch of data available via the API. So that's fantastic for us. As you add this node to get this view, you go to our Add Node wizard, you select that it's a Cisco ACI environment, supply your API credentials, that's it. Everything else you see here will be automatically discovered and displayed for you. So with that second layer, the first place to look is in this members view. Okay, so these are the logical components of the overlay network that sits atop that physical infrastructure. We have a number of different types here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here so you can see more. So In that overlay network, we discover the tenants, the application profiles, the endpoint groups, as well as the apex view of the leaf and spine nodes. So those are the leaf and spine switches. You can see we've discovered each of the entities, what type of entity that thing is in your logical topology, the fully qualified name here, and we have this health score on the right. This is the primary indicator of health in an ACI environment for the ACI in any case. So the interesting thing here is with SDN, we have that really valuable source of health about the network that we have not historically had in a traditional network, because the APIC must know how everything is connected and generally how it's working to deal with outages and so forth. Usually, sort of in a traditional network, each device has kind of a myopic view of me and my neighbors, and not beyond that. So this health score is inclusive of the parents and children. All of those go into that health score to tell you how healthy that thing is. Now, if you click on one of these health scores, you're going to get the history. So the history is shown in PerfStack, and this is a really interesting thing that when we were talking with customers, we found that the APIC provides a great view of their ACI environment, but they had trouble correlating that to their application performance, their performance that users were getting from the network, their other parts of their IT stack. So by pulling that data, normalizing it, and pulling it into PerfStack, we can now compare all of those things on a shared timeline. So as an example of that, we're now seeing the history of the health score and the status of that entity we selected here. If we wanted to see other things, maybe I'll load up one of these that we have already set up. So if we wanted to see our SharePoint environment, maybe that was running atop this ACI network, we could load that, and we can put some really interesting metrics across your entire IT stack on the same shared timeline. So examples of that are the average duration of a application pull or a web page pull. We can put that in the same timeline with the CPU of the server providing that, its memory, requests per second, so application-specific queues and requests. Also things like throughput from your storage, database, IOPS, all of those things in one view. And now if you want to add ACI to that, you can. So we'll add an entity here. This is a quick view of just all the different data sources, data types that we can add to PerfStack. This crosses across all of our Core IT portfolio. In this case, we want to add ACI. So let me find, we'll look at an ACI application profile. Got a couple of them here, so I'll add these two. Within those application profiles, these are discovered from the APIC. We have a couple of stats available. Maybe I want to pull in the health score and connect that together with any changes we have, for example, in current requests per second. Right, so PerfStack allows me to ask questions about my environment very quickly that historically, I've just heard about, but it was so cumbersome to go and implement that I haven't done, right? So is a router that's sending larger packets in general introducing more delay in that path, which introduces a delay for the web page pull time, and how does that relate to my ACI Fabric's health, right? Very interesting questions that you can sort of explore pretty quickly with PerfStack. Jumping back to the ACI monitoring. So the first big chunk is discovering all of the logical components, getting their health score, making those reportable, alertable, and something you can correlate against the rest of your IT stack's time series metrics. The second piece is relationships. Okay, so the APIC GUI has a way to view the relationships between entities. It's actually pretty great. The thing that we wanted to add here for folks is the ability to see those relationships within ACI as well as within the rest of their IT infrastructure, that IT stack again. So here we have this sort of all-purpose tool that we call Orion Maps. So this map view shows up on the left screen of many different entity types, nodes or volumes or interfaces or applications, all sorts of things get this map view. And that map view with zero touch automatically starts providing some sort of contextual mapping for that entity, whatever that entity may be. So here I've gone to an APIX map view. I can see the APIC in the center. When I select the APIC on the right side, I can start to explore the relationships that are immediately discovered by NPM. So I can see here there's a fabric. I'm going to go ahead and add that to the map, pop that on there. And then within that fabric, we have a number of tenants here. So let's pop those on the map. Okay, so I've got my APIC, I've got my fabric, I've got some tenants. Let's look inside a tenant here. So here this one is for SQL. Seems more interesting than test or management. Let's add that. Add that to the map here. Okay, we've got SQL. Now inside of this T-SQL tenant, there's a couple of application profiles and a couple of EPGs. So we'll add that to the map. We can start to see a structure forming here. Is there much inside this management? No. Infrastructure has this AP access application profile. But that application profile, okay, it does have an endpoint group. What's in that endpoint group? Nothing. Okay, that's strange. Okay, so you can see it's pretty easy to start to sort of explore this. And as you zoom out, you can start getting a feel for the structure of these relationships. We can see if there's a better way to view this. Okay, so it's discovered some hierarchy here. Hierarchy. Our auto layout tools. Okay, so we've got the APIC at the top. We've got the ACI fabric coming off of it, the tenants as we would expect, the application profiles, and then the EPGs sitting in those application profiles. And all of the performance or the health scores are what's used to color and reflect the status of that entity in the logical topology. Okay. Taking my notes here. Is there any questions while I see if there's anything I've missed here? Okay, so for me, this was really exciting. I was in Cisco Live Barcelona 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, something like that. And it was really nice to have customers come up to me and say, hey, I have ACI, how do I monitor it? And now I have an answer finally for all of those discussions. So hopefully that solves for folks the problem of just being aware when there's something wrong in ACI. There's definitely a lot more that could be done to troubleshoot. Right now we feel like the APIC is a pretty good way to start doing that troubleshooting. So you jump into the APIC once you discover a problem. And I'm going to jump over to multi-device baselines if there's no questions.
Yeah, that's cool.
I'm getting off easy. There's no hard questions. Is it this easy? Okay, fantastic. The ACI monitoring was a feature of NPM. Now we're going to be looking at a feature of Network Configuration Manager. Okay, so I'll jump over to Network Configuration and specifically Configuration Management, sort of the heart of this product. Now, historically, one of the most effective things you can do with CLI managed devices is standardize your configurations and use templates. As the lead network engineer at a company that had 800 sites, this was incredibly important. It established a sort of standard behavior of the network devices in each of those 800 sites across the world. And that standard behavior made it much easier to troubleshoot when there was an outage. Anytime you got on the phone with one of those sites or were troubleshooting one of those sites, you knew the behavior of that network device. You were confident in that. So you didn't have to question whether that behavior was changed. You just had to look at the variables surrounding how that behavior was actually impacting the network. Super powerful in terms of being able to resolve outages. It's also super powerful in being able to configure new sites and update your site's behavior and all of these sorts of things. Templates and standards super powerful in configuration. Now, Network Configuration Manager is supposed to help you do lots of these things. Historically, we have had two features around this. One is called policies. Policies focuses on security policies. So the idea that you would want to look inside your configs and find snippets of config that were maybe best practice to have or to not have. For example, I want to disable my TCP small services using a sort of a historical iOS one that a lot of folks would use as a security policy. Those policies were really snippet focused, one or a couple of lines focused. Okay. The other thing we've had is a feature called baselines. This would allow you to look at any specific node and specify one of the historical configs or maybe the current config and say, this is good, this is what I'm considering the healthy baseline for this device, and then get notified as you saw any drift from that baseline. Okay. What we introduced, Joe said last year, it actually was very late last year, so quite recently, is multi-device baseline. So let me go ahead and show you what that is. It's what it sounds like. We'll go over here to baseline management. And we could create a new baseline right now for the sake of having sort of interesting context. I'm going to edit to one of our existing baselines. Okay. So the idea here is that you could take those standard configurations or templates that you have after you have gotten all of your devices on those, directly pull that into your monitoring. Okay, and start to assess your environment based on adherence to those templates. So the first thing that you do is you give it a name and a human readable description. Next, you select whether you're trying to match the entire config or maybe some large chunk of the config. So it's really about adherence of the entire thing, not sort of the policy specific where you're looking for a command wherever it is in the whole config. Then you can browse and just select the template on your desktop, wherever it may be, or paste in your templates. And then below, you have a way to interact with that template to tell us what here could change. Okay, so we'll choose some lines to ignore, and we'll say the first example is the host name is going to vary. This was one interesting thing we learned from customers. When we originally designed this feature, we thought and talked and prototyped a lot around how do we use regex or some GUI form of regex so it was more approachable so that you could inspect the contents of a specific line of a config and say, the word host name has to be there, but then it's followed by a space, and then any number of characters without a space that can vary, and then after that it shouldn't vary. All of these complex things, and what we found was that was really difficult for customers to understand, and they didn't need it. They didn't need it. That was super surprising to me. So we ran into this thing where you can just choose what lines to ignore. And it worked for people in practice with their real production configs. They knew what it meant immediately. They could configure it immediately. It took seconds. So this was an exciting breakthrough for us, particularly as we focus on providing very fast time to value in these features with little additional training. Question.
So this is great because obviously you're looking at in the CLI configuration files, imperative configuration as opposed to declarative, but you got a lot of tools out there, and more people are using the declarative code, infrastructure as code tools out there, and I would see a great value in something like this, watching the watcher, so to speak. Those guys are watching the configuration and drift and changing things back, being more active, but how do you know those are working, right? And so, especially in a much more comprehensive tool, you're watching a lot of things, not just.
Yep.
So do you interface with any of the infrastructure as code partners, because this in this way to help watch them and kind of partner with them?
It's an interesting idea. We don't today, so we just added support for XML-based configs, which will help with that, I think. Today I'm demonstrating the CLI-based and then the sort of SDN, which is another take on configuration, but we haven't gone down that route.
Yeah, because you put these tools in, and like I've used Chef and I've used Ansible.
Yep.
And you just assume that they're going to work, and
Yep.
you can't assume they're going to work because sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes things happen, or when you try to apply that configuration by their declarative method, which is really just translating it to this.
Yep.
So how do you know the end state is where you think it is to be able
Totally,
to pull
yeah.
the intent of those configurations by looking at the actual output of what they've done in the declarative and the imperative sense would be really cool, because otherwise, you can't just assume those tools are going to work.
Yeah, totally agree.
And it's a job that computers are much better at than humans, so it's a perfect candidate for this.
Yeah, that's an interesting
That's a big
idea.
deal, and it's a growing market.
Yeah.
Huge
Yeah.
market.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if SDN is ahead. I think there's a more mature need there, but definitely CLI is way ahead, but that's getting more and more popular, so we're going to have to watch that trend.
Yeah.
Cool, interesting idea. Okay. Okay. The other thing you can do in this baseline is outside of this specific feature, you can set some syntax or some rules around when you ignore lines of config. So a great example of that is these lines that iOS and many other network device operating systems add that reference when that configuration was saved. You don't want to be notified every time that's updated, likely. So you can pull in those global ignore criteria from elsewhere so you don't have to keep recreating those. Now, once you have this baseline, you can go and assign that to any node you like. The interesting thing here is because NCM knows a lot about your nodes, you can say, show me all of the devices that are of a specific machine type. So maybe my Cisco Catalyst 3700 stack. Switches, or show me my devices that have some custom property, or show me my devices that fit this host name syntax because I have standards for my host name and I know what my border routers are called. So a really interesting way to apply very quickly to a large number of devices where you would expect a similar config. So once that's done, this one's already created and saved and applied. So I'm just doing the cooking show thing of now let's see the results. So we'll go back over to configuration and configuration management. We'll look at the baseline management. So once that's done, we're going to assess all of your configs across all of those devices against those rules, and you can go and see when there's a drift away from that. You can get alerted when there's drift away from that. Here we see there was some drift for this East 4506E core baseline. So maybe that's for all of my 4506 cores on the east side. Selecting mismatched lines, we can see that's on this specific device. And selecting mismatched lines there, we can see the diff of that config versus what we're expecting. So looking here, I should apply that global criteria ignore. Looking here, the difference, here it is. Okay, so here's the drift from my baseline. So this is exciting to me. The tooling, we've long had the capability in Network Configuration Manager to do bulk configuration, and with that you can sort of carefully walk a large infrastructure over to standardized configs. Now you can take the templates you use for that standardized configs and sort of monitor the adherence forevermore in a way that's sort of seamless and just makes sense to users.
Is this doing a text file diff or what I call object? I don't know, like based on the type of setting. Is it just comparing, like I noticed
It's text.
It's just the text. So like I noticed 497 is shut down. Mm-hmm. Is there a shutdown on the right? Yeah, see it's at 4. Oh, no, those are all. So what I'm saying is, if things got out of order, would it be drift?
If things got out of order,
But they were the same.
Like if 498, 499 were switched.
Yeah.
So,
Same intent.
so
different
part of the problem is how network switchers actually do this. They don't say no shutdown. That's
Yeah, forget the one I picked on.
Right.
But so I rephrased my question. If the text was out of a different order, it would show it as drift?
Yeah, like
so
That's a text compare.
we didn't originally plan that, and then we tried it in our beta, and it broke the
Yeah.
feature didn't work because we
Yeah.
weren't considerate of that. So
Yeah.
we implemented longest common substring matching. That's how we do it. So that way, if there's a line that is added that's unexpected,
Yeah.
we can identify that line and mark it, and then all the previous lines, even though their line number has increased by 1, we're not saying those are all out of order.
Right, okay.
so you don't have any actual
basically-
contextual understanding of what's there. You're just looking at text.
Yeah.
That's right. So we do
I mean, that's still valuable.
configuration.
Create objects out of all
yeah.
these things.
That's
Particularly when you're outside of object-oriented, the configuration is ordered in a specific way, which may have an impact on the network device's behavior. So we would want to see when that varies.
Yeah, it looks
very
have to-
similar to the way you do source
it also
code
keeps it
diffs
very
so different languages have different. So this is essentially a language. So like if you use VS Code and Git for stuff, then there's a lot of this kind of understanding that this changed, but the block is the same, and you've just inserted a new module or a new function,
Yep.
Yep.
and so that won't show up as a diff necessarily. So you can. It's a pretty well.
It's a tough
trodden
problem.
path.
Like it sounds like a simple problem, but
Yeah.
I know it's a tough problem. I'm just
When-
trying to understand where it was here.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've gone for the text diff part, but you haven't quite gone to the next part, which is contextual understanding of the language in
The
which
grammar
you're
and-
doing.
yeah.
Grammar and structure. Yeah.
That's
It requires
absolutely correct,
microgrammars,
yes.
which is
Yeah.
quite.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a consulting client at the moment who did some stuff with microgrammars, which for me is deep magic, and I really don't understand.
It's a really difficult thing. I mean, I think if we were able to deliver that, it would be magical for people. But it's a very difficult thing where I'm not sure anyone is doing a fantastic job. Do you think anyone is?
I know a couple of people who are incredibly smart, and they are doing some stuff which is quite cool. The challenge is that because it's very difficult, the amount of investment required to
Yep.
get any value out of it
Yes.
is quite substantial. And then a lot of it is those things where it's like the engineering is amazing, but the output is
Yep.
kind of a toy problem, and so no one cares.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to do, you've kind of got to do all of that investment, and then I think you've got to go a bit further than that and look at, well, what am I actually providing to a customer that's useful value? And that's really context dependent. So for some of this stuff, like for switch config things, it might be useful, but a lot of this, as Ed pointed out, switches, particularly Cisco ones, are really picky about ordering of stuff.
Yeah.
So if you
have to watch all that.
Yeah, if you do, drop config and something, we put even a line feed in the wrong place, we'll just drop config for the whole rest of the file. So.
Yeah. So for me, part of the definition of a fantastic job means it is broadly applicable and without, a PhD to figure out how to configure it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most missing part of that solving that engineering problem. But I'm running low on time here. So this was multi-device baseline in NCM. So the interesting thing here is both the configuration and monitoring in networks, particularly between SDN versus traditional networks, it's a very different thing, but fundamentally it's the same. It's how do I configure in a way that is consistent, that is not as prone to human errors? How do I monitor that? How do I look at performance from the infrastructure's perspective as well as from your end users? So hopefully these new functions we bring make it easier to run happy networks. Happy networks make happy users. Happy users make for good days in IT. If there's any other questions, yes.
So Chris, I was just waiting for you to finish. I have a few questions on ACI and how
Sure.
you do the monitoring.
Go for it.
So are you doing, what kind of monitoring are you doing today? Are you looking at the TCAN size, power supply failure? What exactly you are monitoring on the ACI fabric and on the AP cluster as well?
So we had a sort of that layer one or the physical layer that was CPU, RAM, interface utilization, errors, discards, those sorts of things, as well as power supplies, fan speeds, temperatures. That's sort of the base layer. And then on the overlay side, we're getting members, health scores, their names, and their relationships.
And you mentioned at the beginning that you're doing today ACI and SX. You're not doing anything on Cloud Vision today?
So small correction there. We're doing ACI today. That's what we just released. No others today. I would guess that our next one would be NSX because that's what we hear next most frequently if we were to do that. Time will tell, and really for us it's about our users using the thing and finding it very valuable, then we invest more. If they're not, we invest less.
And the last question is about MSO. So for example, I know you're doing the APIC, but is there any plan for monitoring MSO as well, the multi-site orchestrator?
Multi-site within ACI.
Yes.
I heard about that a whole lot in Barcelona last week at Cisco Live. I don't have anything I'm prepared to share on that right now.